Raiden Vines-Bright can be a breakout star in the Big Ten.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Just a quick reminder to all you everydayers, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell down below so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Now, Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers out there today. We got a phenomenal suggestion to do some really down to the letter stat predictions, and you know we love our bold predictions here on Locked On Huskies, so we'll dive into that a little bit later. We're also going to talk about some of the biggest concerns ahead of the 2025 season now that fall camp is over. We got a few notes that we wanted to make sure we got out there, but our good buddy Christian Capel over at On Motley, who's got a phenomenal YouTube channel himself now, did his preseason 2-deep depth chart predictions, and his boldest prediction was that true freshman wide receiver Raiden Vines-Bright is going to start.
You know, as a friend of the show, when we go bold with freshmen starting, and I think as crazy as it sounds, when we talked about it a little bit before the show, it's like, well, let's not forget, he did get a significant amount of first-team reps throughout fall camp and specifically in the mock game, where I'm looking down at one of my notes and, you know, I just kind of wrote down the offensive players, and it was 210, Rashid, Decker, Quentin Moore, and then plus Raiden Vines-Bright. And I think that's kind of where the question comes in, where which position would he start at? Because he's not starting in place of Denzel Boston. Like the best I really care right now. But then you have the other two options that are not necessarily set in stone, but you do have some veteran guys above him. But he really has showed out well consistently throughout spring and fall camp. But, you know, again, more so fall camp because he was actually healthy.
So I want to take it back to your question about where he would start, because I think it really is the slot. Like, that's the only logical option here, because it's very clear this coaching staff loves what Rasheed Williams brings in the Z, and they've tried him certainly at both in the slot and outside throughout the course of spring camp and fall camp. And I think a lot of this does also just kind of come down to where Omari Evans fits in all this. And I think that because we've gotten a lot of questions about him, we've seen him run with the first team, we've seen him run with the second team, and I think he might just not be completely comfortable in the slot yet, whereas Raiden's taken more reps there. Audric Harris has, Kevin Green has, and I don't think that Raiden is by any means a lock to start with. You know, as we record this on August 19th, there's still 11 days before the start of the season. So things can certainly still change with fall camp still going on behind closed doors at this point in time. So we don't know what this is going to look like, but as I kind of look at what Raiden brings to the table, I'm not shocked that he's in this discussion at all. I think that's one thing that should be made very, very clear, because it's not just us who's saying this. People who've been at fall camp, the coaching staff. Raiden is the kind of guy who's gotten a lot of hype on the recruiting trail. A lot of the national guys over 247 Sports have pointed him out for a long time as a player who could contribute early. And it's something that Kevin Cummings talked about, I believe it was at Washington's preseason media day, where he's talked for a while that the biggest thing with Raiden is making sure he stays healthy. We know he suffered a broken collarbone that was unfortunate, that kept him out for a good portion of his senior season in high school at IMG. And then he suffered, I believe it was some kind of hamstring injury that Jedd Fisch alluded to that kept him out for the majority of spring practice as well. So as long as he can stay healthy, he looks like a guy who can be a contributor early in his career. This is something that we know this coaching staff is not afraid to do as well. And he showed up in the spring game in a big way with, you know, the unofficial 8 catches for 140 yards of the score or whatever it ended up being, since spring stats are somewhat subjective. But I just think that this is the kind of guy who, no matter what, he's going to play. And I love that Christian decided to throw him in as a starter, because that's kind of where we are, where it's the same thing with John Mills, who was named to On3's preseason true freshman All-America, you know, team or whatever, which is always fun when players haven't played a snap yet. But it's the same kind of conversation for me. These guys have showed up during fall camp and made plays no matter who they've gone against. And they're taking reps away from veteran players, which just bodes well for them and just what this coaching staff thinks of them as well.
There is no wrong point in anything you made, but it did kind of create a thought in my head where how long is he the starter? How long would he hold that job for? Because if you think about The reason why I say that is if you think about Colorado State and UC Davis, those are 2 games where I would say, yeah, you could start Raiden because you can still sprinkle in Omari, you can still sprinkle in Kevin Green and Audric Harris, a number of other guys that are competing for reps in that room, and mostly in that slot position there. But you don't necessarily have to say, hey, you are guaranteed going to be the starter for the entire season. I could see Omari, rounding into form come that Wazoo and Ohio State game. I could see Kevin Green kind of doing a similar situation there, where once they fully get going in the season, then you say, now we're going to turn to the veterans a little more. We'll still see Raiden play, like you said. I don't disagree. It's not going to be like a 3-game sample size and then never again, because we saw with Audric Harris last season where they can sprinkle guys in, but I do think Raiden has shown himself to be more of a consistent, productive player than Audric did, at least in his same career last season.
So I certainly see where you're going with that, but I think one thing that we just need to keep in mind when having this discussion is, no matter what happened, Jedd Fisch didn't change the depth chart last season. Like, they put the same depth chart out every week, which is fine. That's just something that happens in college football, and you can't read into it too much after week 1, which is why, at least for me, I don't like posting depth charts after week 1 because to an extent it doesn't matter. Even in week 1, it doesn't necessarily matter. But I think there's just the other side of this coin of, we could see this depth chart on Monday, August 25th, and we show up for Jedd's press conference, and he might not be a starter. He might not even be on the depth chart. They could say, it's Kevin Green, and then it's Audric Harris behind him in the slot. Like, these are all very realistic possibilities that we need to keep in mind. And it's just kind of comes back to one thing that you and I have been talking about, because it could also be Omari Evans, right? Like, it all comes back to one thing that you and I have been talking about is the coaching staff is really, really excited about the depth this team has at wide receiver. And it's going to, bleed into the second segment, because I think that there's certainly going to be a little bit of a concern with the fact that so many of these guys are not very experienced at the college level and only have a certain amount of reps under their belt. But I just think that the promise is there. The skill is there. The question is, who is going to put it together? And I think Raiden, and one of the reasons that I think Christian decided to make this this prediction is because I think Raiden might have the highest upside of all these guys. And there's certainly something to be said about, especially the way that we understand with Jedd Fisch and how he operates, is upside plays. Like, look at Jonas Savaiinaea during his time at Arizona when, just making the John Mills comparison there again. The upside plays, it's, we love this guy. We love what he's going to be in 2, 3, 4 years down the line, which is one of the reasons that he's in contention at his respective position. And I think that's something that can absolutely just be carried over to wide receiver as well, is there's so much talent and they love what Raiden brings to the table. The question isn't if he's going to play this year. The question is how much.
And I think that's kind of a question for a lot of guys. If you think about, because what about Dezmen Roebuck, where I know he didn't come in the spring like Raiden did, but Raiden didn't play all of spring like you mentioned. So to me, we've kind of bounced that one around, where look at the guys that are having production in practice on a consistent, daily, week in, week out basis, and then counter that with where are we seeing them kind of lined up towards the end of fall camp, like we did in the mock camp and things like that. Dezmen and Raiden both kind of were running with the 1s and 2s. And so I have to imagine in some way, shape, or form, that signals they're going to play. I just wonder, again, what was the number we said? 1.5 for burning red shirts in this group?
At wide receiver? Yeah, it's 1.5.
Yeah. And I'm tending to lean toward taking the over, just because it's going to obviously be 1, but I think for a variety of reasons, it's going to be at least 2, maybe potentially 3.
I don't know if I can get to 3. I think a lot of that might depend on the health of Chris Lawson, who's been in and out of the lineup during fall camp, where he's been my number 2 guy for a while because of just everything that he showed during spring practice, being by far the most reliable receiver, especially with Denzel out for a while and Omari Evans out for a while too. But this also kind of bleeds into one of my biggest concerns about the 2025 season is the experience at several positions. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I linked all my accounts to Monarch, and I immediately spotted a few subscriptions that I wasn't using. I use way too many subscription services in terms of just like streaming apps and different things like that. And canceling those alone saved me money every month that now I can put towards things like my health and an extra tub of protein powder. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONCollege. We've also got a message from our friends over at Open Phone. If you're running a business, every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you needed a service. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need Open Phone, so you never miss an opportunity to connect with your customers. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system designed to streamline and scale your customer communications. Do you juggle 2 phones just to keep business and personal calls separate? Open Phone can solve that instantly for you. Your whole team can share one number and respond to customers like a shared inbox. No more who's handling this. See why over 60,000 businesses trust Open Phone. They're offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockdowncollege. That's openphone.com/lockdowncollege. They'll even port over to your existing numbers for free. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. So Lars, as I look at the upcoming season, there's a lot to be excited about, in my opinion. There's so much talent on this team. There's so many veteran guys that we think are ready to make an impact. There's a couple of preseason All-Americans and so many transfer portal acquisitions at positions of need that you'd like to see, maybe take a huge step forward with a guy like Antario Thompson in terms of production. But I look around this roster and I think there are so many solid veterans at so many different positions that it's hard to not get excited about this season. But with having a conversation like with a guy like Raiden Vines-Bright, the guy like John Mills, and there are certainly a couple other positions as well that we can dive into, I think that I'm a little concerned about the experience, because I look at a guy like Damon Williams and I think he only had 2 starts under his belt, but we saw what he can do, and we know that he's played in so many big stages already that I'm not concerned about what that could be. But there are a couple of other positions where I think if one thing goes wrong here, and I want to get into offensive tackle specifically in a little bit, if one thing goes wrong here, there's certainly a little bit of a cause for concern.
In a way, there's a number of positions we could be talking about with that in mind, because you look at what we saw, and I kind of like to just lean into the mock game, because while it wasn't the greatest, it was something that we saw most recently, and kind of that's the freshest thing in our mind here. And the offensive line didn't have its greatest day. Damon didn't have its greatest day, but we always talk about the potential of this team. We talk about these guys are the next up, but until you actually prove that you are that next end up on Saturdays, it's kind of we got to just roll the dice and see if it works and see if it sticks. And the question is, won't it pop? It's just, when will it? Because we know they'll probably be 3-0 in non-conference play, at least 2-1. You really should be 3-0, because again, we can't remember the last time a UW coach has lost to Wazoo in back-to-back seasons. So Jedd's going to certainly want to avoid that. But you look at their Big Ten schedule: Ohio State, at Michigan, Illinois. There's a bunch of big-time challenges there, and you have to wonder, can UW and those young players, those emerging guys, can it all really fit together in that gauntlet? Because I think that's something to consider in all of this.
And so that's one of the reasons that, when we did our schedule predictions, you and I both took the over, is because there's enough veteran talent that you can get by in a couple of these road games. This is again, what we've been talking about throughout the offseason. There is so much talent on this team. Whether people on the outside, especially, not UW fans, realize that or not, there is a lot of talent and a lot of things to like about every single position on this roster. And you make a great point when it's how will it come together? When will it come together? And I think you and I both expect a lot of these things to come together pretty soon, which is, why it's exciting to talk about a guy like Raiden Vines-Bright and what he can bring to the table, because, he's shown that potential already. And the coaching staff is very clearly excited about what he brings to the table. I referenced a guy like Decker DeGraff. He was a freshman All-American last year. We've seen what kind of potential he brings to the table. Now it's about taking that next step, right? But let's talk about outside linebacker. I think that's one of the big positions that, it's a little bit of a worry, where if Zach Durfee does get hurt, what does that look like? If somebody else gets hurt, we've seen Isaiah Ward miss a couple weeks with an ankle sprain. Who is going to step up? We've seen it be Jacob Lane. We've seen Deshaun Lynch miss a little bit of time in camp with an injury of his own, where behind that, it's who is going to be that next guy who can actually get pressure. Is it Hayden Moore? Is it Devin Hyde, who we've seen take a lot of reps with the 1s and 2s at this point in fall camp? Is it going to be Isaiah Ward if he can stay healthy? Who is X-Ray Alexander is another name I want to throw into that mix as well. but that's the one position right now where I think there's a couple guys to like here, but I think that's right now the biggest mystery for me personally is who is going to just be part of that next wave. I think there are several guys who can do it, but that's the one where I need to see it shown to me on the field.
And that's the kind of frustrating part in all this, bro. We see it on the practice field. We know, when much like in 23, we saw what was coming, but
Sure.
Nobody else really did, and nobody else truly kind of bought into it. And I'm not saying we're not again saying there's going to be 23 all over again, but it does have a lot of the similar feel of those type of seasons where you're seeing everything as long as it comes together, and if you stay pretty much healthy. I think there's a couple of positions where you could have afford a non-season ending injury, but missing a couple of guys because, like, it's a linebacker. If you lose Buddah, you still have Extra. You still have a couple of guys who could, Dezmen Bryant, step in and play a role there. So
sure.
I think it's just a question of what is the true gap on Saturdays between that top guy, like a Zach Durfee and a Hayden Moore, who's looked good in camp, but he's new to the position still. And it's a new position, not position coach too, with Aaron Van Horn. So all of these things kind of, you never truly see it come together on game day. And that's just where I kind of have a little bit of pause for concern to say, hey, like, until we see it really against Wazoo and certainly Colorado State, then we'll kind of go from there.
So this is, and just to highlight the other side of that for 30 seconds before we move on to the offensive line, I think that this is one of the reasons that you and I, especially after the mock game on Saturday, spent so much time highlighting the Ryan Walters defensive scheme, because that's what it's all about. It's about finding ways to, it's always great when you have a game-wrecking edge rusher like he had Nick Scorton in 2023 at Purdue, where somebody like that can just get consistent pressure and just help just other guys, win their matchups in various ways, because you're forcing a quarterback to do one thing or another. And that's the thing where if Zach Durfee can stay healthy, then that's great and you're in a really nice spot. But on the other side of that, it's just who's going to step up on the interior and help you out in the same point, because this defense, it's all about creating those one-on-one matchups up front. And if you're winning them, then great, you're happy. And, maybe you don't need a second outside linebacker step up if there just is consistent pressure coming from the interior. But again, that's just a question that we have not just seen come to fruition just yet, because we haven't seen what this looks like on the field. And I feel like we could say the same thing about the offensive line, because you talk about just positions where maybe you can afford an injury. We don't need to get into which ones. I think offensive tackle is the one right now where you can't afford that, where I know a lot of people, have their opinions about Jurassic Party after last season, but this coaching staff is very happy with how far he's come. Let's see what it looks like when we get to August 30th. But this coaching staff has put their full chest behind him and saying, we are happy with the progress he's made and believe he's going to be much improved this season. Carver Willis, he's brought here to be a steadying force at left tackle. If he's not an all Big Ten first or second teamer, I don't think that's a disappointment. But if he's just steady and sturdy for the entire season, that's something you're going to be really happy with. But if either one of those guys goes down and is forced to miss, let's just call it a month. I'm looking, just giving an example, when Julius Buelow went down in 2023 and he was forced to miss a month, you found ways to make do on the interior of the offensive line. I look at this tackle group right now, and I think Maximus McCree has potential. I know this coaching staff was happy with how he performed, given all the circumstances from the 2024 season. I look at Soane Fasolo, I look at Justin Hilkema, David Boyaji, and even John Mills to an extent. And I think all of those guys still might be a year away from being ready to compete consistently for a spot at that level. And I think that that's the one position right now where if somebody goes down, you might run into some problems.
I mean, I would honestly just say pick any position on the offensive line, because there's a couple of positions. I'm
not there on the interior, to be honest.
I did. The only reason I say that is because, again, we don't want to name names here, but let's just say one of your guys, the younger guys, goes down, but it's not like the freshman, and now you're thrusting a champ Taulia into that role for 3-4 games. You just kind of have to wonder, and that's why I go back to my point about being running the Big Ten gauntlet, is you're going to have to go to Wisconsin, you're going to have to go to Michigan, depending on when those problems might arise. You just don't know for sure if those guys are going to hold it. We both think they can, but I'm just saying, I'm saying more, it's not a big concern, but it's just a pause for concern more so than really anything else.
Well, so here's why I'm not as concerned about the interior as I am about tackle. I look at the interior, and let's say it's it's Kieran Hatchett, since we saw what that might look like in the scrimmage a week or so ago. We know that it would be John Mills at left and Paki Finau on the right. Something else happens. Yeah, maybe it's Champ Leah. Maybe it's Zach Henning. There's another world where maybe Landon Hatchett, who played a whole bunch at right guard last season, slides back over there and you slide Zach Henning in at center. I feel like that's not going to be the case. And it would probably be Zach or Champ or somebody else at right guard. But I think that they're just a little bit more comfortable with where the depth is there because Champ, just to spend 5 seconds there before I move on, Champ is the guy who you and I have touted as just a physical run blocker. And if you need to help him in pass protection, you need Landon to come over and double team a fair amount. You want to trust John Mills and, Carver Willis and Drew to hold up in one-on-ones against a 4-man rush. You can find ways to make that work. I think if Carver or Drew goes down, you're just in a whole lot more trouble, especially with what we saw Zach Durfee do when he was maxed up consistently with Max McCree over the last couple of weeks. I just think that there's more room to provide help on the interior where there's not right now at tackle, which is something we're going to continue to monitor as the season goes on. But Lars, we got a phenomenal question about doing some bold predictions, so we're going to dive into the numbers. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Prize Picks, because this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy platform that lets you turn your football predictions into real rewards. Preseason is already heating up, and college football isn't far behind. Whether you've got your eye on big-name quarterbacks or breakout running backs, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in the game. Prize Picks is simple to play. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. If you get your picks right, you could cash in and win up to 2,000 times your money. The flex play option is a total game changer. Even when one of your picks misses, you've still doubled your money. Prize Picks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. Download the Prize Pick apps today and use code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, run your game. We've also got a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. If you want to talk about dark horses in the divisions, I think that the NFC South is absolutely wide open this year, and it's time to give a shout out to a UW legend who I'm also taking his over in touchdowns thrown this season, by the way, in Michael Penix Jr. I think that offense has so much firepower, and Mike, they came up just short of the division last year, and with Michael Penix at the helm for a full season, I think it's time that the Falcons get over the top and make it to the NFL playoffs for the first time since 2017. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. So Lars, we've been asking for suggestions on what we can do more of this season from all our everydayers. And if you've seen that on Twitter, on YouTube, please feel free to leave us a comment, because we are so happy to get back to you and just find ways that we can continue to improve this show every day. With that being said, we had a wonderful suggestion on Twitter from @HuskiesForLife, who was asking for very specific predictions for all our starters in terms of, our two deeps on the depth chart, different things like that. We're going to get to a little bit more of that next week when we see an official depth chart, because we haven't even done our two deep predictions yet. That's just a little teaser to stay tuned for later in the week. So we have come up with 5 categories where we have written down overall numbers, and that's rushing, receiving. We're just going to do yards and touchdowns for both of those, tackles, sacks, and interceptions. We have come up with specific numbers and who is going to lead Washington in those categories this season. Lars, let's start with rushing, because that's what I have on the top of my list, and I'll hand it over to you.
So obviously player is going to be Jonah Coleman, although I did think for 30 seconds, what number would Damon have to get to usurp him? Because it's the only other option there is
over
Damon.
1,000 yards.
100%. But I'm just saying, in that vein, I'm like, there's no way I can see it. Certainly not this year, maybe. Who knows what happens in 2026? But I think give Jonah Coleman, even say dozen touchdowns, and I'm gonna go. He's gonna get another 1,000-yard season, but I in a way gonna be like Savon Ahmed. Give me like 1,028 yards.
Oh, because Savon was 1,000 on the nose, so that's fine. I like where you're going with that. So just a little peek behind the curtain for all the everydayers here. When we were prepping this before the show, all we told the other person was who we were picking. We didn't say numbers. We just said, hey, this is the guy I have in this category. This is the guy I have there. I also have 12 rushing touchdowns for Jonah Coleman. But like I said, my big bold prediction for the season is that Jonah, who took 216 touches last year, is not going to see near that number this season. I'm in the range of 180, 190, somewhere in that ballpark. And I think that's going to help him be a little bit more efficient. So I actually have him with 1,125 rushing yards this season. I feel like he can get there. And that's something where we're still going to see Demond in the mix, still going to see Adam Muhammad in the mix, but it's something where I think Jedd Fisch is going to want him to finish his career out on a high note. So if we say him, stay in there a little bit later, especially early in the season against some of these teams to stat pad a little bit, a lot like you and I have talked about with Demond Williams, I'm not going to be shocked.
Yeah, but I think also at the same point, like it's just, I'm going to be curious at what point because like we saw last season, in mid-October, let's say, Jonah kind of started, not taking it off, but just started feeling the wear and tear. And I wonder, do you prevent that from having Adam, take a few more carries early on in the season? I think that would be the route that I would go. And to your point about him having less, like, I don't think they would stat pad because, Jonah's not – worth noting, Jonah's not that type of player. Jonah's like, he wants the recognitions. He's got the grill, he's got the chain, all that. But he's a very humble kid. So he would rather take, 18 touchdowns and 900 yards than 12, call it 10 to 12 touchdowns and, 1,300 yards. So
let's move on to wide receiver. I think for receiving yards and touchdowns, we both probably have Denzel Boston.
Yeah. I like the receiver, but there's nobody else that comes close.
What do you have for numbers?
So for receiving yards, I do think, again, Denzel gets over 1,000. I'm kind of right there with your Jonah number. I have him at 1,100, just flat. Like, I know the number is never going to be flat, but I feel confident in that. The touchdowns is where I'm intrigued because there's so many options. I think Denzel might have a harder time, especially in the red zone if he's double, potentially triple cover, which somebody will. But again, you could prove me wrong. But I'm just saying, I still think he's going to be in that 8 to 10 range, even though he probably will be higher. I'm just going to be conservative on that.
So I like where you're going with that. He had 9 touchdowns by week 7 last year. I certainly think he's going to get into double digits. So I had him with a baker's dozen at 13. I put him at 1,200 receiving yards. I was doing round-ish numbers because I thought that it's just a fair enough ballpark, because I also think that, with all the numbers he posted last season, it was still effectively, especially when you look at his touchdown numbers, a half a year. So I think that he can get to 1,200 yards. I have him at 80 catches because the top 2 receivers in these Jedd Fisch offenses usually get a significant amount of targets more than, 3rd, 4th, 5th, even combined to a certain extent. And I think we're going to see that with Denzel before he most likely inevitably goes off to the NFL for the 2026 draft. So that being said, let's jump over to the defensive side and let's start with tackles.
So this one is intriguing because we kind of went, I kind of went a couple of different ways with it, where there's an easy choice, there's a semi-easy choice, and then there's kind of a third that's off the wall. And the leading tackler for me is going to be Alex McLaughlin at safety. Yep. Just a guy that has been an impact player in Northern Arizona. The production's there. The proof is in the pudding. I have him at 123 tackles. Just, I already 1, 2, 3 kind of, yeah. I just like that. That's just to me where I know it sounds kind of crazy, but it's total tackle. So it's not solo. It's, there might be, the extra or 2 assists there. Just him kind of always being able to be around the ball. I think that will help his numbers as well. But it's just hard for me to not see him having certainly over 100.
So I actually put him just under 100. I had him at 93. I know I just talked about nice round numbers and then I went back on that. But I have him at 93 tackles because I also have him as the leader. And the reason I'm so shocked is because Dylan Tiedemann, in his 2 years at Purdue, led this Ryan Walters defense in tackles with 106 and 104 respectively as a freshman and then as a sophomore. So I don't necessarily think it's going to be that high. I was kind of between Alex and McEllisteen because I have them as the 2 starting safeties as of right now. And I went with Alex because of everything you just said in terms of his range and just everything he's been able to show in the box, especially during fall camp, combined with the production and everything we saw from him at Northern Arizona. So I look at everything he brings to the table. I think 93 is the number I have. And just to kind of assert our point and why it's not Buddah Al-Uqdah or one of these linebackers is in 2023, 6 of the 8 leading tacklers at Purdue were defensive backs. And then 2024, it was 4 out of the top 8. So it feels like it's just kind of a matter of which of these safeties is going to be around the ball the most. And I think in both your and my mind, that's going to be Alex McLaughlin. So with that said, let's move to sacks.
That's where my dark horse for potential total tackles comes into play, and it's Zach Durfee, the obvious one, the one that, again, you could throw in Buddah Al-Uqdah if you want. Maybe Alex as a honorable mention just because he's around the ball so much. But to me, if Zach Durfee can stay healthy, he could have a 12-sack season and a guy that is probably in top 3 in tackles on the team when it's all said and done.
So I like where you're going with that. I went a little bit safer there where I have him with 8 sacks. Zach Durfee is also my leader. We saw what he can be during fall camp. We've seen it for a while now. The biggest question with him is just making sure he stays healthy. That's been the biggest thing throughout his career. I mean, especially after last season, 23 was its own story, which is somewhat unfortunate. But I like where you're going with that. My dark horse in terms of sacks, I wanted to go Tai Uyunglele, but I have it as Ontario Thompson. If he's a guy who winds up with 4 or 5 sacks this season, we know what kind of insane athlete he is on the interior. And we've seen him in spring and fall camp consistently be able to win one-on-one matchups with power. So if he can continue to just add to his bag of pass rush moves a little bit and just finally put it all together, which is something he told us earlier in fall camp that this coaching staff has really helped him do, I wouldn't be surprised if he's top 3, top 4 on this team in sacks. So just a guy to keep an eye on there. And let's round this out with interceptions.
The other option that we've kind of been talking about at a number of these statistical leaders is the guy that I could see doing it, and it's Buddah Al-Uqdah, the transfer from Wazoo, a guy that when you're talking about being, it's hard not to pick Alex McLaughlin as well, but the kind of almost easier and logical case to be made for Buddah is who's at the heart of the defense. Like if you're talking about a guy where we've seen it in fall camp, a number of those over the middle crossing routes or, 10 to 12 dig route. Yeah, there's a number of places where Buddah can kind of find himself. And, it really seems like Ryan Walters and this scheme has unlocked in this fall.
So I certainly agree with you there, where we saw him make so many plays during spring practice. He led Washington State with 3 interceptions last season. So I have Washington's leader with 3 interceptions, but I have it as Leroy Bryant. And it's, a debate you and I have had for a while in terms of who is going to be the corner that opposing teams pick on. And I look on the outside, and I certainly don't think it's going to be Takario Davis. I don't think it's going to be Ephesians Prysock. I think we're going to see him continue to just get more comfortable in this defense. He's had some really, really nice days during fall camp where with corners, it's very simple. We don't see him getting targeted a lot. He's certainly been picked on once or twice. We highlighted when Raiden Vines-Bright burned him on a go route earlier in fall camp. But for the most part, he's someone who this coaching staff has had a lot of positive things to say about. We know, especially after missing spring practice with the offseason cleanup surgery, that he was playing hurt for a certain portion of last season. And I look at what he brings to the table, and I don't think that he's going to get tested a lot, maybe against Ohio State when he's probably got to get Carnell Tate a decent amount of the day. I think it's going to be Leroy Bryant. I've got him with 3 picks. He's someone who I think coaching staffs are going to identify him as not necessarily the weak link, but the untested guy in this defense. And it's going to cause teams to go at him early and go at him often, where it seems like he's overtaken Rashawn Clark as the favorite to start at the position. So no matter who was going to be in the nickel, that was going to be my pick for this no matter what. And right now it seems like that might be Leroy Bryant. So that's where we're going with that. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everyone for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure to click that like button, click the little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comments section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.